I wasn't invited to the family gathering. In the very house I'd helped pay for, with my own money, half of it straight from my savings. But what really stopped me cold wasn't my son's silence. It was 2 weeks later, when my daughter-in-law stepped into the backyard with an appraiser right beside her, sizing up my house, like I was already 6 feet under. They figured I was just some old mom they could shove aside without a second thought. They had no clue I'd already started making my own plans the minute they shut me out. Eleanor, we decided to keep the family get-together small this year. Just the 3 of us and the kids. You understand, right? You probably need your peace and quiet anyway. That text from my daughter-in-law, Vanessa, hit my phone at 7:12 on a Tuesday morning. I was sitting in my kitchen in a quiet suburb outside Chicago, sipping coffee that had already gone lukewarm, staring out at the backyard. It wasn't a shock, more like a confirmation of what I'd been feeling for a while. Ever since my husband passed 3 years ago, Vanessa had been slowly trying to run the show. My son Ryan didn't say a word. He never did when she made the calls. I set the phone down. I'm 64, a retired accountant. I don't cry over text messages. I analyze them. You need your peace and quiet was code for, we want your house for the weekend, but without you in it. They probably assumed I'd head over to my sister's place in Milwaukee like I did last year. But this time, something cool and crystal clear rose up in me. If I wasn't part of the inner circle anymore, there was no reason for me to keep bankrolling their comfortable life. I got up, walked over to my filing cabinet, and pulled out the green folder. I knew exactly how much I'd been sending their way every month for that house I'd co-financed. I covered the upkeep, the insurance, even the lawn service, because Ryan was always so stressed at the office. The numbers added up to a chunk of change money I could have used for the trips I kept putting off. Vanessa thought I was an endless ATM she could tap whenever she felt like it, then ignore the rest of the time. She was dead wrong. I grabbed my car keys and headed into town. First stop wasn't a lawyer. It was the bank then, the county recorder's office. I needed to know exactly where I stood before I started tipping over the first domino. The banker downtown had known me for decades. Mrs. Harlan. You want to stop the automatic payments on your son Ryan's mortgage contribution. He looked surprised. I just nodded. And close out the joint maintenance account? Yes, please. Effective immediately, I said calmly. No drama, just signatures. When I walked out of the bank, I felt lighter than I had in years. I'd been acting out of duty for so long, but that duty had become one-sided. If Vanessa was cutting me out of the family weekend, I was cutting her out of my budget. Back home, I moved to the next step. I lived in a spacious ground-floor unit in a building I owned outright. Ryan and Vanessa lived in that newer house on the edge of town that I'd helped fund. Vanessa had already dropped hints that my place was way too big for one person. She'd been making plans for my estate before I'd even thought about checking out. I called an old real estate friend from my working days. Greg, I need a fair market valuation on my property. Keep it quiet, no for sale signs in the yard. That afternoon, Ryan stopped by. He looked nervous. Mom, did you get Vanessa's text? It's really just because the kids have so many sports things going on, and we didn't want any extra stress. I looked at him. My son, who couldn't even meet my eyes. I understand completely, Ryan, I said gently. Actually, it works out great for me. I've decided to make some changes in my life. You might want to sit down with Vanessa tonight and talk about your finances. He frowned but didn't ask questions. He was used to me handling everything. As he left, he didn't even notice I'd already changed the locks on the garden shed, where he stored his winter tires. First move made. The quiet in the house suddenly felt like pure gold. The next few days, I stayed busy. I went through my files and realized I'd shelled out nearly $45,000 over the years for so-called emergencies that mostly came down to Vanessa's expensive tastes. New patio furniture because the old stuff wasn't cute anymore. Private piano lessons for my granddaughter that she rarely showed up for. I made a simple list, no emotional rant, just the numbers. Numbers were the language I spoke best. On Thursday, Vanessa called. Her voice was all sugar, which meant trouble. Eleanor, honey, Ryan said you mentioned something about finances. Was there an issue with the pool service payment? I leaned back in my chair. No issue, Vanessa. I just stopped the payment. Since I'm not part of family life anymore, like you said, I figured it was only fair for you two to cover your own luxuries. There was a long pause. I could practically hear her biting her tongue. But Eleanor, that's not what I meant. The get-together was just this one time. She stammered. It's a choice, Vanessa. And I've made mine. I replied evenly. I hung up before she could say more. A minute later, I glanced out the big front window and saw my neighbor, Mr. Reynolds, a retired cop we got along with, walking his dog. I waved. He knew I'd need someone keeping an eye on the place while I was away. I'd decided to head up to a rental cottage on Lake Michigan for a couple of weeks, right during their family weekend. But first, I had an important meeting with my real estate guy. He already had a buyer interested in my house, ready to pay a strong price. A quick sale was possible since it was paid off. The idea of trading this big place for a smaller spot by the water was sounding better every minute. 2 weeks went by. I'd ignored every call and text from Ryan and Vanessa. I knew the pressure was building. Without my monthly help, things were getting tight for them. But I never expected them to be this bold. One Friday morning, I was having breakfast when I heard voices in the backyard. I stepped to the window and couldn't believe my eyes. There was Vanessa walking around with a guy in a gray suit holding a clipboard. They were circling the house, pointing at the roof and windows. They'd actually hired an appraiser to value my property. They probably thought they could declare me incompetent or pressure me into signing it over early. I opened the sliding door and stepped outside. Good morning, Vanessa. Who's your friend? I asked with a calm that clearly rattled her. She looked caught for a second, then flashed that winning smile. Oh, Eleanor, we just thought it'd be smart to know the value for insurance purposes. Ryan's worried about rising property prices. The man in the suit gave me an apologetic look. I'm Mr. Caldwell, property appraiser, he said shortly. I smiled at him. Mr. Caldwell, I'm afraid you're wasting your time. This house isn't for sale by anyone else, and my daughter-in-law has no authority over this property whatsoever. Vanessa went pale. Eleanor, don't be like that. We're just trying to help. I took a step closer. Help. By appraising my house behind my back, please leave, now. When they didn't move, I pulled out my phone and called Mr. Reynolds. He showed up at the side gate in seconds. He didn't have to say a word, his presence was enough. Mr. Caldwell apologized quickly and headed for the street. Vanessa glared at me with pure hate. You'll regret this, Eleanor. We're your only family. That's exactly the point, Vanessa, I said quietly. Real family doesn't shut someone out just to keep their money. She stormed off, and I knew the war was officially on. But I held the stronger position. After the backyard incident, I knew I had to move fast. Vanessa wasn't the type to back down. I spent the weekend sorting through my personal things. I didn't want to haul big furniture, just what truly mattered to me. Everything else could go with the house. Monday morning, I met Greg again. I've got the purchase agreement ready, Eleanor, he said. The buyers are a young couple from Milwaukee. They want to move in right away and take it as is. Perfect. I signed the preliminary papers. We'd still need the notary, but the deal was locked. I kept a lifetime right to one of my smaller rental units up north that Greg also handled. While I was organizing the files, Ryan called. This time, I answered. He sounded desperate. Mom, what's going on? Vanessa says you threw her off the property. We've got bills we can't pay. The bank froze our account because we're overdrawn. My heart gave a little twist, but I stayed firm. Ryan, you're 38 years old. If you've set up your life to depend on your mother's money, that's on you, not me. He tried the guilt trip. But the kids. The get-together was just Vanessa's idea. And you stayed quiet, Ryan. Silence is agreement. I ended the call. I went down to the basement and shut off the main water valve to the in-law suite he used for storing his online business stuff. He didn't pay rent, but he sure used my utilities. I'd told him months ago to clear it out. Now I gave him 3 days. I texted him a photo of the locked basement door. No long explanation, just the date and time. I was surprised how calm I felt. It was the calm of a woman who'd finally stopped carrying everyone else's load. The 3 days flew by. Ryan never showed up to move his things. Instead, Vanessa sent a long, nasty email calling me vindictive and saying I was ruining my grandchildren's future. I didn't even finish reading it. I deleted it and kept packing. On the 4th day, a small moving truck from a hauling company pulled up. I'd hired them to clear the basement. Everything went into storage in Ryan's name, with me covering the first month. After that, the bills would go straight to him. Just as the crew was loading the last boxes, Ryan's car swung into the driveway. He jumped out Vanessa right behind him in full rage mode. "What are you doing? That's my stuff," Ryan shouted. He looked pale and exhausted. Vanessa charged toward me. "You old witch! This is theft." I stayed on the top step of the deck. "No, Vanessa. This is an eviction after the deadline passed. The items are safely stored. Here's the receipt and the storage address." I handed Ryan the paper. His hands were shaking. Vanessa started yelling again, but I cut her off with a raised hand. "Listen carefully. This house is sold. The closing was this morning. New people move in 2 weeks from now." The silence that followed was deafening. Vanessa stared at me like I'd just yanked the rug out from under her, which in a way I had. "Sold?" Ryan whispered. "But my inheritance." "You already spent your inheritance over the last 10 years, Ryan. In monthly checks and favors. Whatever's left is for my retirement." I turned around, walked inside, locked the door, and pulled the curtains. I could hear Vanessa outside tearing into Ryan for not doing anything. It was the last time her noise reached me. The next week was strangely quiet. No calls, no texts. They were probably lawyering up or looking for a way out that didn't exist. I used the time to prepare for my move up north. I'd found a bright little condo in an old captain's house on Lake Michigan. It was exactly what I needed: 1 bedroom, a big living room with dune views, and a modern kitchen. No yard to maintain, just a balcony for my herbs. I sold my old car and bought something smaller and more efficient. My whole life was getting simpler, cleaner, and more honest. One evening, my sister called from Milwaukee. "Eleanor, I heard what you did." Vanessa called me, crying her eyes out. I had to laugh. "And did you buy it?" "Of course not. I know you. If you went this far, they earned it." "But what about Ryan? He's still your son." "He is my son, yes. But he needs to learn how to stand on his own 2 feet. If he lets Vanessa tell him how to treat his mother, he has to live with the consequences." We talked for a long time about the old days. It felt good knowing I had real support that wasn't tied to money. The next day, the mail brought a letter from a bank. Ryan had tried to take out a loan and listed me as a co-signer without asking. The bank wanted confirmation of my signature. I drove straight there and made it clear it was unauthorized. I didn't file charges, that wasn't my style, but I made sure my name was flagged so I could never be used as a guarantor again. Ryan had burned the last bridge himself. There was no going back. I didn't feel pity, just a deep disappointment at how little he really knew me. Moving day was a bright October afternoon. The truck was parked out front and 2 strong guys carried my few boxes out. The house looked empty and strange, even though I'd lived there almost 30 years. But it was just walls. The memories of my husband lived inside me, not on the paint. As I closed the last windows, I spotted Vanessa's car down the street. She was watching. She didn't get out. She didn't come closer. She just sat there while her safety net drove away. I walked to my car, set my purse on the passenger seat, and was about to climb in when Ryan came around the corner on foot. He looked awful. He stepped up to my window. "Mom, you're really leaving?" "Yes, Ryan. I told you I was. We canceled the family get-together," he said softly. "Vanessa and I just fight all the time now. She says it's your fault we might lose the house." I looked at him for a long moment. "I didn't put you in this spot. Your greed and lack of respect did. You tried to treat me like a resource you could mine. But I'm a person." He dropped his head. "Where are you going?" "That's none of your concern right now, Ryan. If you ever get to the point where you can see me as your mother instead of your backup bank, you can reach out through your aunt. Until then, I'd like no contact." I started the engine. He stood on the curb, looking lost. I drove away without checking the rearview mirror. As I crossed the city limits, I felt the weight lift off my shoulders. I owed nothing more to my past. I didn't owe anyone anything except myself. The 3-hour drive north got saltier with every mile, and my mind got clearer. My new condo was perfect. The landlord, an older guy named Captain Thorne, who looked like he'd spent his life on boats, was waiting for me. "Welcome to the North, Mrs. Harlan. Up here, the wind blows different, but it clears your head," he said, handing me the keys. He was right. For the first few days, I did nothing but walk. I strolled along the beach, watched the seagulls and the restless gray water. I bought fresh fish at the harbor and cooked for myself. It wasn't lonely. It was peaceful. I set up the place slowly. Every picture I hung, every dish I placed in the cabinet was my choice. I had my budget under control. The money from the house sale was safely invested. It would give me a comfortable retirement without ever having to ask anyone for a thing. After a couple of weeks, I sent my sister my new address with a note not to share it. I wanted time to settle in. Of course, mail started arriving soon enough. A handwritten letter from Ryan. No whining about money. Just that he'd moved out. He was living in a small apartment near his office now. He and Vanessa had split. I only just realized how much I let myself get twisted around. He wrote. I set the letter on the table. It was a start, but I wasn't popping champagne. Words had always come easy to Ryan. Actions would have to prove it. I didn't answer right away. I wanted to see if this new independence lasted longer than a few weeks. Instead, I stepped onto my balcony and breathed in the cold night air. I was proud of myself. I hadn't just saved my money, I might have saved my son a chance to grow a backbone. 6 months later. It was spring on Lake Michigan. The first wildflowers were blooming in the dunes and tourists were starting to fill the cafes. I was sitting at my favorite spot by the harbor, reading the paper. My life had found a new rhythm. I volunteered tutoring bookkeeping for young entrepreneurs in town and had a small circle of friends I played cards with regularly. That morning, I saw a familiar car pull into the parking lot. It was Ryan, alone. He'd tracked me down through my sister and I'd agreed to meet. He looked healthier, more grounded. He sat down. We didn't talk about Vanessa. We didn't talk about money. He told me about his job and how he was paying down his bank debts on his own. It's tough, Mom, but it feels better than before. I nodded. That's how it works, Ryan. Responsibility is the price of freedom. We took a long walk by the water. There was no big, tearful reunion, no dramatic scene. Just two adults learning to meet each other as equals. He stayed overnight at a nearby inn and drove back the next day. He didn't ask for money, and I didn't offer any. As his car disappeared over the horizon, I knew I'd done the right thing. If I hadn't pulled the emergency brake back then, we both would have sunk, I financially and him as a man. Now here I stood, a 65-year-old woman with her feet planted firmly in the northern sand. My home was small. My accounts were mine alone, and my boundaries were ironclad. I turned and headed back to my captain's house. I still had plenty ahead of me, and the wind was at my back. I wasn't just someone's mother or mother-in-law anymore. I was Eleanor, and I had finally come home. Sometimes losing your spot in the family is how you find yourself again.